Most NFL players are really given the definition of life on the easy street after their professional career. Anyone who can make millions of dollars and invest it into proven assets like the S&P 500 or real estate should in theory be just fine after they retire from football. Sadly, over 70% of all professional athletes end up going broke shortly after retirement. The lifestyles they lead are oftentimes expensive, and they get used to having a near endless amount of cash flow coming in every month. Some players accept their new reality and change lifestyle expectations, but some decide to turn to crime in order to keep living their high-flying lifestyle. One of these players is former NFL cornerback Will Allen, who decided to spend his post-playing career being a key mastermind behind a $35 million Ponzi scheme. He was eventually found out, and both he and his business partner ended up receiving prison sentences. Today on FootballLore, we explore the life and crime of former NFL player Will Allen and the role he played in one of the biggest financial crimes in United States history. Will Allen was a talented football player who was born in Syracuse, New York. He only ended up spending 2 years on the varsity squad as a cornerback, but he managed to break the school record for interceptions in a single season. This got him a spot on the All-New York State team. And since he was a hometown product of Syracuse, after high school, he began his career for the Orangemen. He was an outstanding cornerback for the Syracuse squad, and also was an asset on the kick return side of things. His speed would have spectators snapping their necks trying to keep up. Obviously, performances like this at Syracuse attracted the attention of NFL scouts who loved his aggressive play style in combination with his out-of-this-world speed. The New York Giants were especially interested in Allen, considering he had played his entire career in the same state. When he was available in the 2001 NFL Draft, the Giants would end up using the 22nd pick of the first round to select Allen. This made him an instant millionaire, and he grew to appreciate the lifestyle that comes with that. However, it was totally okay at the time, as he was making an impact on defense. He wasn't anywhere near the level of someone like Darrelle Revis, but it wasn't like he was prone to getting absolutely burned either. He ended up being the definition of serviceable cornerback, and over the years, improved his game to being one of the most capable coverage corners. The one thing that consistently held him back from becoming a big name was his lack of ability to create interceptions. He could do exceptionally well when it came to coverage, but he just wasn't the turnover threat defenses really value in the NFL. This made it an easy choice for the Giants to replace him after a 5-year stint with the team. After being released from the Giants, he ended up signing a $12 million contract with the Miami Dolphins. While he already had begun to appreciate the finer things in life, this amount of money in a flashy city like Miami kicked it into overdrive. Miami isn't a city where wealth whispers. It's a city where it is peacocked all over the place. He began to try to keep up with those around him, but in Miami, $12 million can be some business owner's yearly salary. He did manage to continue to improve his on-the-field performance, becoming one of the most elite cover corners in the league. This secured him a $16 million 2-year extension in 2009, adding even more millions to his already padded bank account. His world would come crashing down when in a game against the New Orleans Saints, he tore his ACL and was placed on the injured reserve. This period was difficult on Allen, and he ended up receiving a DUI charge in February of 2010. The Dolphins then found out he wasn't going to be available for the upcoming season either, and told him he needed to take a pay cut in order to stay on the roster. Even after restructuring to take a pay cut, the Dolphins wound up releasing him in 2011. That is the tough world of the NFL. The franchise will tell you that you have a stable spot, but at the end of the day, this is a business. He wound up signing a 1-year deal with the New England Patriots in 2012, but was placed on the injured reserve before even setting foot on the field in a uniform. He was an immensely talented cornerback when he could stay healthy, but with his off-the-field issues and his body falling apart, no team was going to take the chance of having him on the roster. Corner is an extremely physical position, and while there are some positions in football that lend themselves to long careers where people can play well into their 30s, this wasn't the case for Allen. After 11 years in the league, his body had become beaten down. A lot of his speed had disappeared, and most of the NFL knew that his best years of performance were well behind him. This point hits every athlete at some point, and most usually start preparing for this inevitability by saving up more money and making smarter investments as their career is coming to an end. Allen hadn't made the changes necessary to put himself in a strong financial situation after football. He was still living the lifestyle of someone bringing in $5 to $6 million a year, and due to his age and ability, those days were never going to happen again. This left him in a tricky position. It takes a hefty dose of humility to drastically reduce your lifestyle once you have seen how the 1% lives. So Alan began looking for business partners to launch ventures with, and found a potential candidate in the form of Susan Dobb. Susan Dobb was a 56-year-old inhabitant of Coral Springs, Florida. She was a fan of the financial high life as well, and she was a retired banking executive who knew quite a bit about the financial world. She was looking to start a business in the loan sector, and when she and Alan crossed paths, they decided they would be perfect partners for a business that had the potential to be incredibly profitable. Short-term loans for affluent individuals. He and Susan Dobb had decided to open a new company called Capital Financial Partners. Their business plan was simple. Alan had experience in the NFL and knew that professional athletes sometimes need short-term loans to make payments and purchase assets before contract money hits. He and Susan decided to open a business that specializes in giving athletes short-term loans with high interest rates. We're talking interest rates of up to 18%. Some professional athletes have terrible credit and aren't able to work with traditional lenders. There was a hole in the market they intended to fill, and on paper it made sense. Theoretically, there is an almost endless amount of money to print with this. Sure, the clients may not have money at the moment, but if they just signed a huge deal with any major sports league, you know that they will be good for the amount eventually. They start to pitch investors in order to raise funds. After all, this isn't a cheap business to run. You need access to tens of millions of dollars in order to give the size of loans athletes would be requesting. Sure, some banks thrive on doing $10,000 personal loans, but this clientele would be requesting loans in the hundreds of thousands and millions. They even made investors specialized pitches. If a certain athlete had requested a loan, they would go fundraise for that specific athlete, meaning investors could pick and choose whose loans would be serviced. In theory, this provided peace of mind they were not giving out loans to athletes who would be unable to repay. But it was a smokescreen for the shadier side of things. While the business never tracked their average loan, they operated with a minimum of $100,000. The problem was a lot of these loans only existed on paper. Alan and Dobb would go raise funds for a hypothetical loan of $2 million just to pocket the money and pay it out to themselves. FBI documents revealed that Alan and Dobb would divert the fund to unrelated businesses under their control and then pay themselves out the related amounts, pretty much defrauding anyone who thought they were giving legitimate loans to athletes. Sometimes the loans just straight up didn't exist, and other times it would be a real loan that Alan and Dobb would inflate to pocket the difference. For example, a $100,000 loan would be requested, but they would raise $200,000 while pocketing the difference. This allowed them to make millions, and considering Alan was no longer receiving his massive NFL checks, it allowed him to keep living a luxurious lifestyle funded by this fraud. He was still rolling around in supercars, living in mansions, but all under the means of an illegitimate business venture, defrauding dozens of investors. It isn't really known if the business was always intended to turn into a Ponzi scheme, or if it just sorta evolved into that. Both Alan and Dobb claim the business was initially started with good intentions, but it also isn't in their best interest to claim they knowingly started a Ponzi scheme. I have no clue, but my speculation is that the business only operated for a 3-year period. That is an unusually short period of time for fraud to just start randomly occurring. Either way, both Dobb and Alan ended up convicted, but it is still a mystery as to what their intent was in the first place. Obviously, at first, they were raking in money hand over fist, but as time went on, investors began to request their investment back. This is when the Ponzi scheme aspect started. When investors would get impatient and demand their initial investment plus interest, the pair would just raise more money with fake loans and use that to pay off the investors. This is the textbook definition of a Ponzi scheme, and as soon as this started, it was a matter of time until it collapsed. You can only raise new money from investors for so long. Plus, as you take on more and more investors, the amount you need in order to pay everyone off continues to grow. Once you start doing this, it may take decades in the case of Bernie Madoff, but eventually, your house of cards will crumble. This venture ended up collecting somewhere in the ballpark of $35 million from its investors. While not all of that money was paid out to Dobb and Allen, they each pocketed millions of dollars from 2012 to 2015 while operating the scheme. Eventually, though, investors began to get frustrated with the delayed payouts and changing terms, and someone ended up causing enough of a ruckus to instigate an investigation by the IRS, FBI, SEC, and Department of Justice. The one good thing about a Ponzi scheme is that it is incredibly easy to spot once you know what to look for. Not long after the investigation began, both Dobbs and Allen were charged with a laundry list of financial felonies. They included multiple counts of wire fraud, conspiracy, and money laundering. The SEC brought the criminal charges in June of 2015, and after this indictment was handed down, their assets were largely frozen. Of the $35 million raised, the pair had repaid only $22 million to investors. The remaining $13 million was just the initial capital, not the interest payments promised on the money. Obviously, this money had been long spent by the defendant, and with their assets frozen, Will Allen was forced to use a public defender in his case. When facing a laundry list of felonies in a case like this, there is pretty much no chance he was going to be able to get off. His defense was mostly that he wasn't an experienced banker like Dobbs, so therefore should carry much less of the blame for the scheme. The judge wasn't buying it in this case. While he didn't have the financial experience of Dobbs, he was still well aware that they were diverting investment funds for other purposes. The structure of taking the funds and paying them out over shell companies also was a key sign that the two knew what they were doing was wrong. There is no way you set up a sea of shell companies just to launder the money without knowing something was off. Regardless of if he knew exactly what was going on, there were plenty of times to ring alarm bells if things were this suspicious. The judge ended up finding the two guilty and sentenced them each to 6 years over the financial crimes they committed. As for what they spent the money on, it was the usual suspects of stupid things people place too much value on. They had racked up $1.4 million of credit card charges on casinos, pawn shops, jewelry, grocery stores, clothing stores, and cigar stores. It wasn't like they were stealing the money to take care of a sick relative in a foreign country. They were stealing the money to blow it on a luxurious lifestyle they couldn't otherwise afford. It really was like they wanted to get caught, as all the spending was easy to track for the feds. Allen had used his status as a former NFL athlete to comfort weary investors and presented himself as an expert on all things related to the business. Investors felt like they had inside knowledge, thanks to him knowing the industry inside and out. If Allen had truly just been someone there for marketing, he didn't have to reassure investors. He had a level of expertise to guarantee investments. There had been whispers of an investigation potentially landing on the company, but what really blew it open was an NHL player filing for bankruptcy after allegedly receiving a loan. 24 investors had allegedly loaned an NHL player $5.65 million. They had sent paperwork to investors claiming this player was accepting and receiving a loan from them. The only problem was the player had never signed the loan agreement, even though Allen and Dobbs had collected all of the funds. When the player filed for bankruptcy, he listed that he owed them $3.4 million, which tipped off investors. They had been overcharged $2.2 million on their investment. From there, it was incredibly obvious that fraud had taken place. On top of a 6-year sentence, they were ordered to pay $16.8 million in restitution to the investors they had defrauded. Obviously, this amount includes the returns promised to investors, but considering the pair is now banned from operating a financial business, the odds of this ever being paid back is unfortunately slim to none. The pair doesn't really have the income to make significant payments towards this amount, but it is more a symbolic victory for the defrauded investors. It isn't every day an NFL player is found guilty of running a Ponzi scheme, so obviously news stories made the rounds. Will Allen has served his sentence in the years since, but has kept a low profile since his release. I also want to make it clear this is not the same Will Allen that played for the Steelers. This is a totally different Will Allen that played cornerback. The Steelers' Will Allen has reported his frustration with certain people confusing the two in the past. I don't blame Will Allen for trying to keep a low profile since he was released. He will always have that $16 million in restitution hanging over his head. None of us can say what inspired Will Allen to join in on creating a Ponzi scheme, but it should be obvious that defrauding investors of tens of millions of dollars is a surefire way to end up behind bars. That is the story of Will Allen, the NFL player who stole $35 million. Sometimes those of us who have been given the biggest advantages in life just can't seem to hold it together. If you enjoyed this video, we would appreciate you pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed it, we post football documentaries like this regularly and would love your support as we try to reach 10,000 subscribers before the end of the year. On screen is a video we think you'd enjoy about NFL player Sam Hurd, who was living a double life as an interstate drug trafficker. His double life eventually came crashing down as well. Thank you for watching.